I got a bandsaw on Facebook Marketplace. And you might think to yourself, Joe, you already have a bandsaw. What do you need a second one for? First of all, shut up. And secondly, the one that I have isn't big enough. Horizontal bandsaws are very useful tools in a shop. Stock material comes in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes you need to make rough cuts to cut something close to the size so that you can take precise cuts on a mill or a lathe. In my case, the thing I'm cutting a lot of is tubes, and so far for small tubes, this is totally fine. Here's a 3-inch tube, you bring the saw blade down, and it cuts right through it. It uses the weight of the blade itself to actually put tool pressure on there and cut through the piece of stock material. This is a 6-inch diameter tube, but we could probably still cut this if we needed to. At the maximum setting, I'm gonna get just enough clearance on here to cut this. I'm no longer building a 6-inch space shot. That was the original plan. The new plan is 8 inches. Let's take a look at an 8-incher. Pause. 8 inches is a lot of inches, okay? I know in the Meat Rocket video I said 4 inches is plenty, 8 inches is too much. This is not gonna be able to like cut all the way through the 8-inch tube. Obviously you could do some goofy stuff where like you rotate it around as the saw blade cuts through it, and that would be right up my alley, to be frank with you. That would be the exact amount of sketchiness that we're used to on the BPS.space channel. But check this out. Through the magic of Facebook Marketplace, I can now very comfortably handle 8 inches. Pause. A good horizontal bandsaw costs a shocking amount of money. It's a little bit more than you'd think. Something like this brand new would cost thousands of dollars, which is why I've avoided upgrading this little piece of crap for as long as I possibly can. But let me tell you, Facebook Marketplace for machine tools is awesome. I got this from a guy in a motorcycle shop who sold it to me for $500. I probably could have haggled him down to $300, no problem, but I am not Michael Reeves. I do not have his bot that negotiates on Facebook, and I'm a really bad negotiator. Much like my receding hairline, this thing has seen better days. So let me tell you what, let's clean this bad boy up, let's make a cut with it, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it works in the process.
Finding this thing felt like striking a pot of gold. It's a dusty pot of gold. It's covered in grime and oil and who knows what, but it's a pot of gold nonetheless. Finding it was half the battle, but the other half was getting it to my shop. I had some help loading it into the car from the guy who sold it to me, big burly dude who builds and modifies bicycles.
This thing weighs like 1,000,000 bajillion pounds, dude.
It's probably closer to like 200 or 300. I thought about calling a friend to help me get it out of the car, because this isn't something that you can just thug out.
I feel like I can just thug it out.
With heavy machines like this, moving them yourself is not a fine idea.
Seems like a fine idea.
And so when you get the idea to just move it yourself, don't do it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do it.
This bandsaw has a coolant tank in it. With bigger bandsaws, and especially on particular metals, you need coolant to cut with it. You can cut aluminum dry, but some of the ferrous metals, you really need coolant.
Oh. It's leaking.
I don't know how long this thing was around, just sitting in the shop. It sounded like the guy didn't really know either.
Why is it peeing?
But it wasn't long enough for all the coolant to evaporate from the tank.
Oh, it's really peeing now. Oh, that's fine. There it is. Yup, we're back, department. Yeah! There's a lock for this, is there not? Why didn't we lock it when we put it in the car?
Some bandsaws have a locking pin that keeps the arm closed, and if you're ever going to move one of these things, hindsight 2020, definitely engage the locking pin so it's not swinging open everywhere. Again, it's not a good idea to move this stuff yourself. You can't just thug it out.
I can just thug it out. I can.
With the move out of the way, let's get to cleaning this thing up. It's covered in dust, grime, metal shavings, what looks like maybe phenolic at parts. I don't know, some type of tan composite material. And this is the worst type of grime. There's like dust and oil mixed into one, and it's the stuff that you really have to scrape off with a lot of elbow grease. Some of the parts on this aren't in tip-top shape. The wheel that closes the vise just free floats, just comes right off. When I was in the shop with the guy loading it, the key for the wheel to connect it to the shaft here wasn't even in the machine. It was just sitting like 5 feet away from the machine, and I happened to spot it on the floor. There's no discernible logo on this, but most of the text that I can find is in English, except for one little bit. Right here on this cylinder, it says Hua de Yeya. Hua de Yeya. Hua de Yeya. You know what they say, hua de ye.
华德液压
Seems like a Chinese hydraulics company, and that gives me a few ideas. A few companies that make machine tools use Chinese castings as the base. Precision Matthews for my lathe is one of them as well. This is an import casting, and then when they bring it into the States, they modify it with imperial units and spiff it up a little bit. Another company that does this is Grizzly, and after poking around on their website, I think I've got the G0561. It's a 1 horsepower motor, which matches what I've got. It's got 4 speeds, which matches what I've got. The blade length, if this Sharpie is to be trusted, is about the same. The switches are in the same location. It's got this little swoosh as part of the casting, which I've got on mine as well. The only big difference is it's missing the Grizzly logo. There's a chance that this was from Grizzly and then the logo was removed, or I think more likely it was sort of white label sold from China, and regardless, getting it for $500, even if it's in tough shape, is a pretty good deal. I still can't emphasize enough how disgusting whatever liquid in this coolant tank is. I mean, this might be decades old liquid. I really don't know. Not only is there a lot of grime on the machine, there's a bunch of rust and some interesting add-ons. Seems like the previous owner added a custom fixture to the vise. I'm going to leave this attached. I don't really mind it that much. It doesn't cut into the work volume. But the rest of the situation here needs to be remedied. This thing is disgusting. The silver lining, of course, is that it does run. It does turn on. That was kind of a deal breaker for me. I didn't want too much of a project when I brought this thing home. So it works just fine. It does run. I bet if I put some metal in here, it would cut okay. All the inside stuff looks fine too. Everything's covered in this thin layer of grime, but it works. And it came with an extra saw blade. It's a little rusty, it's got a little kink in it, but I don't know, it's an extra blade. But taking care of your tools is important, so let's clean this thing up. For cleaning here, I'm using 2 different grades of steel wool. I didn't know they made them in grades, but they do. Grade 3 is like thicker and more robust than grade 0. And then I got this quote-unquote specialist WD-40. I'm super skeptical that this is any type of different formula. I think this is just branding, and I am a sucker for good branding. It says it's supposed to penetrate rust, so let's see if that holds up. We're going to start with the motor here. There's a plastic beat-up cover around it. I'm going to take this off and expose the cooling fan, and we're going to start wiping down all these surfaces. You know what? 1 second here. This is a scary capacitor, so let's just make sure there's no potential on it. Okay, we're good there. Let's get started. I'm using these gator wipes, crocodile wipes. I don't remember what they're called. They're kind of like a split between a shop towel and a Clorox wipe, but they hold together pretty well. They don't fray too much, and I think they do a little bit of disinfecting.
That's a feather. Like for a bird.
Seems like a couple of possibilities here. I mean, I suppose this could have been a bird slaughterhouse, but I think the more likely scenario is that bird had nested in this at one point. The motor cover is in pretty tough shape. I'm not going to fix it, but I am going to clean the grime out of it, and then we'll move on to degriming the rest of the motor. If there was one part that I really wanted to do, it was the motor itself. These are pretty big radiator fins, but when the fins are covered like this, they are a lot worse at convecting away the heat or conducting it. I don't know, dude. I don't really understand how heat works. The door on this electrical box here has 4 points that it should screw in, but it only has 2 screws in there. Very cool. Got a little bit of light weighting going on, and it's just a bunch of wire nuts inside. My camera died while I was fixing this, but if you see the little wires that are sort of sticking out of this box, I basically undid the connector nut that's at the bottom and slid the wire back up into it, so there are no exposed wires there now. The other thing I did is deal with this honkin' capacitor. I actually measured the potential of the capacitor a bunch of different times in a bunch of different scenarios. I'm not really sure what it's there for. Maybe it's for like braking or something. Either way, I didn't disconnect it, but the cover for it was all fractured, and I found a creative little fix to get rid of the exposed leads, which is I just flipped the cover around. After getting the belt off, I can start cleaning these wheels. I used a little bit of steel wool on this, but then I switched over to LPS3. This is a rust inhibitor that I apply to my machines. I live out in Southern California, so it's pretty dry here. I don't worry about rust that often, but it does creep in from time to time. So any surface of a ferrous metal or something that can rust usually gets a slight coating of this stuff, and it works wonders. One of the best parts of this process was seeing the nice green color return. There were several parts on this machine that you wouldn't even know were painted green because they're so covered in grime. The paint in a few places is a little fractured. I don't mind that so much, but getting the color back out will make this thing look a lot nicer. You can't see it in these shots, but thankfully the belt is in decent shape. With older polymers, it's easy for them to crack and get really hard. I mean, you can find this with a rubber band that's more than 2 years old. It gets all weird and crackly and loses its stretch. So perhaps a good indication that either this machine is not that old, just very heavily used, or it is old and the belt was replaced at some point, or they used a really high quality rubber. Anyway, replacing belts on unknown machines is really annoying, so I'm glad I don't have to do that. With the belt replaced, this thing runs great, so let's move on to the gearbox. I'm not sure why exactly horizontal bandsaws converged on this design. I guess it makes some sense, but it feels strange to me that the motor isn't more directly connected to the wheel. I suppose it makes sense because if you want to be able to alter the speed, you need to either have a VFD for the motor or you have to use these belt wheels. But it's still funny to me that it has to go through this direction change and the motor isn't integrated like 90 degrees to where it is right now. And this is not uncommon in other designs. This is how my existing horizontal bandsaw works too. The gearbox here is sealed with 2 different gaskets. One of them's red, one of them's black. My guess is there was only a black gasket from the factory, and this gearbox was opened at some point and then replaced with a little RTV. And that's what we're going to do here. I want to change the oil within this. We got to make sure these gears are lubricated. So I'll start by absorbing the oil into a paper towel that exists there, which is not a lot. I don't think there's any contact between the oil and gears right now. Removing the oil revealed that there is a very thick layer of metal shavings at the bottom of this gearbox.
Ooh. That's some gunk.
If this were in anything other than like a silly bandsaw, I'd be really concerned. But these are hardy gears. They've got a lot of meat on those bones. I'm not too worried about them. But also, holy shit, look at all of these shavings. Anyway, I found some of this on my shelf. It's all-season synthetic reciprocating lubricant. I think I've been using this for air compressors or vacuum pumps maybe. After removing as much metal as I could, I filled the gearbox back up with lubricant until it touched the gears. And as long as we're touching a couple of surfaces, they'll lubricate themselves. I have to imagine this is the first time these gears have rotated this smoothly in maybe years, just given how much gunk there is. You can also see some of those metal shavings floating in the oil. It's nice to have some sparkles in your oil. That gives it character. I removed as much of the red gasket as I could, and I left the black gasket. I feel like this is probably redundant. We just want to seal this enough so that the oil doesn't leak out. After cleaning up the surfaces, I applied RTV onto most of them, and then I reapplied the cover to the gearbox. The paint on the face of the gearbox is kind of gross, so I figured let's just get rid of it. I began with steel wool, but that wasn't cutting the paint off fast enough, so I used sandpaper. And then afterward, I rubbed on a layer of LPS3. That's the rust inhibitor from earlier. Since this is an exposed surface, it'll be a little more susceptible to rust than before. The rest of the surfaces in this area weren't too bad to get to. It's funny, some of this stuff requires elbow grease and like a lot of hard work, but a lot of the actual problem with this, or like a lot of what's undesirable about it, is that I'm squatting the whole time. And, you know, I'm like 50 billion years old at this point, so my lower back hurts, my knees hurt, my fingers hurt too. The hard part of this process wasn't using big muscles, it's that like there are a lot of weird angles and then you keep jamming your finger from time to time. If there's one thing that's going to need to be replaced at some point soon, it's this hydraulic cylinder. This is for regulating the descent rate of the arm for the bandsaw. So if you wanted to have a really slow descent rate that isn't just controlled by how aggressively the teeth of the saw can cut through, you'd set this to limit it. It's sort of like a governor or a regulator. The reason I say that it needs to be replaced is that even after cleaning it up, wiping it down, making sure it was super spotless, I have noticed that oil keeps dripping out of it. So we're kind of running like an open loop situation. I expect at some point I will run out of hydraulic fluid. And that'll be a fun day, but it's not today. The guideways here are covered in grime. This part is probably not even worth cleaning. Like, the grime might be doing more to protect them from rusting than anything else. And as far as parts that are going to immediately become covered in grime again, these are like number one on the list. But one of the things that's nice about buying a used machine and having to clean it up is that you have to become pretty intimate with it. And by that I mean you kind of have to learn how all of the parts work. You end up taking pieces apart, putting them back together, and in the process you understand how they work. When I was in high school, I did this a lot with guitar amps and audio equipment. I would offer to take stuff home from my school that had broken or been abused by students or whatever, and then fix it up myself. And in the process, I ended up taking a lot of things apart and learning how they worked. And it's a win-win because in the end, the school got something that was fixed and I got the knowledge I wanted. I tossed a little bit of steel wool on the saw blade. I don't think it really did much, and it probably won't do much anyway because that blade is in contact with so many different things at so many different times in the cycle throughout the machine. But just in case there was rust on there, I want to start this machine's life with me off with as little rust as possible. Speaking of rust and age of the machine, by the way, I found something interesting. So there's a coolant line that runs along the arm of the bandsaw, right? It's this orange line right here. And I didn't think twice about this until I started cleaning the line and noticed that the coloration on it was wildly different at the mounting points. I'm starting to think that this machine was exposed to the sun for quite a long time because I can't think of anything else that would do this other than UV radiation. The pattern on this is pretty consistent, like it's not on one side. I wouldn't expect grime to necessarily do this. And I get the sense that like this thing might have just been sitting out in the sun for a while. As I'm watching this footage back, I'm noticing more and more parts that are probably missing from this. I'm mostly going to be cutting aluminum and sometimes composites on this bandsaw, and I don't really have a need for the coolant feature, and that is probably for the best because it looks like there are some fittings that are missing on the coolant dispenser here. The Grizzly bandsaw I'm looking at has this copper pipe that's supposed to go down and dispense coolant right on the blade, and I've got this like loosey-goosey situation here. But now that we're getting down to the parts with bare metal, it's time to deal with this rust more. We're going to put this apparently rust-penetrating WD-40 to the test. Regular WD-40 will totally remove rust, by the way. You don't need to fall for this gimmick like I did. And, you know, maybe it is actually a better formula, but removing rust has a lot more to do with elbow grease than synthetic grease. The bed of the bandsaw here, that is the bare metal surface that is, I was going to say ground flat, but I think it's a fly cutter that did this. Anyway, this is the part that has the most rust on it. I did 5 or 6 iterations where I put WD-40 on there, let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes, and then tried to scrub it off with steel wool or a wire brush. And for what it's worth, it did improve the situation, but there was a good amount of rust that I just couldn't get to come out. And I kind of think this is because it's a cast iron base. Cast iron is sort of a porous metal, so there's a lot of opportunity for rust to form in crevices or cracks that you can't really get to with like a surface treatment. And so while the WD-40 may have been getting down in there, the only way to really remove that rust is to just like, maybe the only way to remove that would be to grind this whole surface down 10 or 15 thou. Either way, I'm happy getting off as much as I can. Wow, pause. Either way, as long as we get the surface layer off, that's enough for me. In between WD-40 applications, I opened up the arm here to clean the inside. This is where these big wheels drive the actual saw blade itself. The wheels were in great shape. For how old this thing seems to be, I mean, the tightness was good, there were no cracks, there was a little bit of grime, but they were fine. All the internal surfaces had that same layer of grime that this whole thing does, but since this is a glossy surface formed on what looks like bent sheet metal, the grime comes off a lot easier than it does on some of the cast iron stuff. Here's a surface that you wouldn't believe is supposed to be green. Basically anything that gets cut on this machine is going to deposit material onto this surface, so it's no surprise that it looks like crap. But of course, a little bit of water, a little bit of elbow grease, and eventually, out of desperation, a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, which did dissolve some of the paint later, it's revealed that this surface is indeed supposed to be green. While working on the bed of the bandsaw, this exposed surface, I also tried to clean up some of the vise surfaces. If I were doing this professionally or for someone else, or if the machine was like a lot nicer, I'd spend more time on these. I'd detach them from the machine totally and then put them in, maybe like an ultrasonic cleaner would do it. But for this, I mean, these things are already kind of trashed. We've got these weird custom fixtures on here. It's whatever. So I gave it a good scrub and called it a day. There are actually 2 mechanisms that hold the arm of the bandsaw from slamming down onto the surface. One of them is that hydraulic cylinder from earlier, but the other one is this huge spring. This was a little bit loose and filled with dust, so I tightened it up and wiped it down. I went about cleaning this thing pretty intentionally, specifically in the direction that I was cleaning, which is top to bottom. Every time a surface gets wiped down or compressed air sprayed on something or IPA or rust inhibitor gets sprayed on the surface, there's a little bit of grime that falls downward, and so as I clean, I'm moving from the top of the machine down. This was by far the most satisfying part of the process because this is the grossest part of the machine. This tray is supposed to catch all of the coolant that is sprayed everywhere when you're cutting and using the coolant pump. And so so it's just filled with grime and soot and chips. And interestingly, all of this oil, I think, ended up protecting the paint because this surface looked the nicest out of the whole machine. Once the grime was off, it turned out that the paint was really protected by that grime. There's probably some type of life metaphor to pull out of that, but I don't have anything coming to mind right now. I couldn't quite get this front surface to reveal the nice shiny green that the rest of the machine has. This surface would have seen a lot of coolant and chips over the life of the machine, so I'm not that surprised that it didn't come out looking great. And some of these bottom surfaces were a little hard to reach. As the process came to a close, I was getting a little tired, so I sort of deprioritized some of these. One of the things I saved for last was draining the coolant tank, and I wish I had done this at the start because holy Moses, this is so gross. It didn't smell or anything, it just was like the most nasty color and texture of water I'd ever seen. God, that's disgusting. Like, as this thing was dripping into the bucket, I kind of felt like I was watching someone vomit.
There's leaves in here. This is disgusting.
I don't plan on using this coolant tank or coolant pump, but I figure if I'm going to have the machine in my shop, it should be in usable shape. So if I ever decide that I want it to be clean enough. This has a little more relation to the paranoia I feel about composites dust, but any surface that has dust on it can redistribute that dust elsewhere into your lungs. So just keeping all the surfaces clean is important.
Oh. God, what is that?
The last two steps here are cleaning up the outside surface of the bottom frame and wiping around some of the switches. One of the things I like about horizontal bandsaws is they turn themselves off. As the arm of the saw moves down, most are configured so that the power switch is right under a little nub on the arm, and so as the arm drops, it shuts the machine off. It's kind of like one of those boxes that you flip the switch and then it turns itself back off. And with that, we're all done.
Oh, shoot. I didn't replace that. Okay, hold on.
Okay, alright, well, we're almost all done. After putting the cover back on the motor, now we're really all done. This machine is imperfect in a lot of ways, but it's exactly what I need, and it was $500. The chance that this was going to end up in a dump somewhere was pretty high. I mean, given the condition of the machine and what it looked like at the start, it looks a lot better now, but it probably wasn't destined for greatness. And I'm not saying it's destined for greatness now, it's destined for a lot of really cursed projects, but one of those is going to be cutting parts that are going to go to space. I never ended up fixing the wheel that can just come off whenever it wants for the vise. And it does this weird thing where it will tighten the vise, but if I want to loosen the vise, I can easily just pull it apart. I'm not totally sure how that works. It will actually clamp onto a part with a ton of force. So there's clearly some locking mechanism going on, but who knows? This wire brush here, I think, is supposed to strip off debris from the blade, and this is both not mounted in the right place and also super old at this point. I have no real need for this. I don't have one of these things on the current bandsaw that I'm using, so I'm just going to leave it as is here. Most of these surfaces and the blade itself got a ton of WD-40 applied. This is just to spray WD-40 pretty much anywhere I can. That'll help prevent rust and make sure everything's sliding past each other nice. And now that we've got a bandsaw that looks good, let's see if it cuts good. The blade made about a 1.5 millimeter dent in the aluminum.
Wow, that's slow. Huh. Okay. I think it's time to call it quits for the day. This blade very clearly needs to be replaced, and I do not have the beans in me to do that right now. Also, I just want to be done with this project and move on. Someone should make a video that talks about finishing your projects. I'm really happy with where this is at. I probably saved a couple $1,000s buying one of these things used instead of buying it new, and I've been avoiding replacing the one I have purely for that reason. It's a bulky machine, it's a big investment, it would be a lot to set it up. Even if it came assembled, it would be a bunch of work to get familiar with it. I am now intimately familiar with how this machine works, inside and out. That's another great reason to buy used machines that are in need of some repair. As you repair it, you learn a lot about how this thing works. I enjoy making short, simple videos like these, and if you like that too, you should subscribe. This is about the quality level that you can expect every 2 weeks on the BPS.space Patreon as well. And patrons will know I have been dealing with challenges regarding 8-inch tubes for a little bit of time now. Sounds more suggestive than I meant it to. Why don't we call it quits for today? Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching. Thanks for watching. And third of all, thanks for watching. My name Joey B. Mimi bye-bye. Yeah. Yeah, you know what? F it. Let's call it there. Oh, God, I'm so tired and my knees hurt. Ugh.